Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm here today with Julian Cole. Julian, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me on. Excited to have a chat.
He's live and direct from Portugal. I'm very, very envious. Julian has worked as a strategy consultant to brands including Uber, Apple, Snap, Facebook, and Disney. So some of the biggest, most recognizable brands on earth. Previously, he was head of comms planning at BBDO and BBH in New York, where he's created a list of award-winning work for brands like Bacardi, Foot Locker, Mountain Dew, Snickers, and M&Ms. I love this bit. You helped to launch the PlayStation 4, and it went on to become one of the highest-selling consoles in history. From 2019 onwards, Julian started the Strategy Finishing School, where he's helped literally thousands of marketers around the world to complete his program and become better strategists. So when I thought strategy, I thought, Julian, want to get you onto the pod. It's an elusive space. I think it's a difficult space for lots of marketers out there. So let's rip in. So what does a strategist do?
Yeah, so a strategist, there's a lot of different types of strategists, and I'll talk about the type of strategy that I know best, which is a strategist who sits within a creative agency. Mm-hmm. And so if we think about that, even if you don't have a creative agency, it could be the strategy that takes you to your advertising, from marketing to advertising. That is what I focus on and the strategy that I work in. So all that creative agency experience, I was an in-house strategist there. And then, as you were saying, I went into client side and helped them with their in-house teams in strategy, or when they were briefing out to creative agencies. So when I talk about strategy, like the basics of strategy, I've got a model which I call the 3-2. It's like a 3-2-1 model.
Yeah.
1-2-3 model, which is a strategy should be one paragraph or one page. It should have 2 points of view. It's the business point of view and the consumer point of view. And then it's got 3 parts to that. And the 3 parts, and this is what all strategy has, not even advertising strategy. It has a problem, it has a goal, and then it has the insight and solution, which is the way around that problem to get you to the goal. So when we talk about advertising strategy, we're usually thinking about that from the 2 points of view. So we need to make sure those 2 points of view align. So I always find it easiest when we talk through an example with this. Mm-hmm. So an example for that is in like 2019, Spotify came out with this campaign called Listen Like You Used To, which was targeting Gen Zs. And so, or Gen Xs, sorry. Yeah. So Gen Zs, Gen Y, all on the platform, big spenders of money in music, and then they also spent on streaming services. What they realized when they looked at the data, they had a business problem because Gen X were spending a lot of money on music, but we're spending the least amount on subscriptions, streaming subscriptions. So there we've identified what the business, and you could say that's the marketing problem, was. So the difference between just a kind of a strategy or a business strategy and an advertising strategy, as I was saying, it's the 2 points of view. So we've got the problem there, and we can see it from the business's point of view. Their problem is Gen X's not wanting the platform. And then secondly, there's probably some smart goal they've got around that, which is grow by 2% within the Gen X category in 2023.
Yeah.
So that's the business side of it.
Yeah.
Then when we look at the consumer side of it, you've got to look at it from a completely different perspective. Okay, we have to ask the question, well, why aren't they subscribing to these services? And so back then, the biggest problem was they realized that a lot of Gen Xers were feeling like they were being left behind by culture and music. So there was this interesting statistic that came out, which is when you turn 34, you start listening to more older music than newer being music that was published in the last year. Mm-hmm. And so it's this moment, and definitely I went through it myself, where you kind of
I may not be guilty myself, Julian.
Yeah, you kind of feel like, oh my God, I don't I try to understand as much as I can, but it feels like everything's moving past me really, really quick. And so they realized that this was a problem, and Spotify was kind of caught up with this of like they had a lot of cachet of being like this cool cultural brand. And so they realized that a lot of people were feeling like left out by this, and they were thinking, well, the music I like, that's not going to be on Spotify. The music that I was listening to in 1998 or 1988, not going to be on Spotify. So they realized, and you can see it, completely different problem here. Consumer problem was feeling left behind by culture. Business problem, no, we need Gen Xers to buy our platform. So 2 points of view here we've got. Now, the insight that unlocked it was what we just talked about. It's kind of interesting when you're told that, oh, yeah, you're right. And so what they did is this campaign around London, and I'll kind of voice it over for you what the campaign was. It was like 1988, your 24-hour party people. 2019, your 2 to 4 hour party people. Definitely understand that. Or it's like 1998, baggy jeans and the Spice Girls are on tour, and then 2019, ditto. And so what they were trying to show was like, actually, you are part of culture, and culture kind of goes on this cycle, and you're part of it. And Spotify sees you, and we understand, and we've got that music that you like. So listen like you used to was the campaign. So these billboards were all around London. There was another one like UB40, red wine. And then it's like you are 40, red wine. So just like really smart billboards, which said, hey, and this was all around London on the way for people coming in on their commute when they're thinking about listening to music and probably listening to their radio or something else. This was like, hey, actually, Spotify's got that music that you like as well. So if we go back to it, it was one paragraph. So I've got a way that I usually write that up, which is, I call it like the nested strategy, because on the outside is the business problem and business goal. Inside of that is the consumer problem and goal, and then the insight and single-minded message. So that's the one paragraph we would write like that. Then the 2 points of view, the business and consumer, and then the 3 things. We've got, the problem. So for the business, Gen Xers, then if we do this campaign, we believe that we'll get more Gen Xers on. And then from the consumer's point of view, their problem was they're feeling culturally on the outer. This campaign helps them show, no, you're part of culture now. You're still right in it. So it gives them that confidence. And then the solution is listen to Spotify. And so that's how I define a strategy. 1, 2, 3, and that's all the pieces.
And so essentially the business problem always, that's kind of the driver, right? That's the thing that gets brought to the agency or brought to the in-house team. And then from there, we apply the framework.
Yeah. And we always begin with the business problem and the business goal. Where do we want to get to? How do we know what success looks like if we get there? I think the biggest mistake that I often see is that it's just left there. So you kind of have creative briefs, which is not a creative brief, because a creative brief is looking at it from the consumer's point of view. They'll often have things like, we need to create awareness of this new product feature. So we've got to create awareness of our new playlist if it was Spotify.
Yeah.
That is not a creative brief. And that's because that's just saying your problems as the brand. So we really need to understand both sides of it.
Yeah. And I guess all great marketing starts with the customer, right? In terms of their pain points and their understanding and their life, right?
Yeah, totally.
Interesting. And then in terms of the insight, how do we get the insight?
Yeah. So the insight, what my definition of what an insight is it's a revelation that shows us a new way to look at the problem. So a new way to look at the problem is either, I see it as kind of 2 ways. The first way is it reveals a new solution that we hadn't thought about, or it reframes the problem to a bigger problem that we didn't even know existed. So that's what that's what it is. But I think the most important part of what an insight is, and it often gets abused in companies, is an insight has to be a revelation. And a revelation, there's a difference. If you hear a fact, if you just nod your head and go, yeah, that sounds about right, that's not an insight. That's, like 58% of mums say they're busy. Everyone knows that. You're not giving us anything new. But a revelation is something that we've never heard of before and never thought about in that way. So I was working on a competitor to Roomba, the electronic vacuum cleaners.
Yeah. And
the insight that came out was actually just from an Amazon review. And the Amazon reviewer said, Roomba is like your drunk roommate trying to clean. And I was like, hang on. Yeah, you're right. It is. It does that weird kind of pattern where it's not going in like a straight line and just goes all over the place.
Yeah.
I think that is how my roommate would clean. So you see that you have, hopefully you have a reaction. You're like, they say like comedians also deal in insights. That's, they set up the common expectation, then they shatter that expectation and show you a new way around the problem, a new way to look at something. Scientists and artists as well. So they say when a comedian hears an insight, he says, ha. A scientist says, aha. And then an artist says, ah. And so I always look when I'm talking with my creative team or another strategist to see if I've got an insight. That's the test. I just look at their faces and I say, are they like lighting up and saying, oh, that's a great way of looking at the problem, or not? So, yeah.
And like, how do you get to it? Like, because you've got so much experience, right? We're working in Manhattan, big agency land, huge budgets, teams of people solving really, really important, complex problems. How do you get to that point or that process? Is it literally doing something like skimming through Amazon reviews and picking out something that resonates? Is it huge amounts of research? And then I guess at the other end of the spectrum, you're a small in-house marketing team with very limited resourcing. Like, is it the same approach or very different? Like, how does it work?
Yeah. So I think the very first point would be having a clear understanding of what the problem is, like what's the consumer problem, because that's what you're trying to do. You're really trying to reframe that, can either reframe the consumer problem or what people think is the problem, or provide the surprisingly solution. So it all starts there. Then the common ways that you get to it, and we'll go from big budget to $0 budget for research,
awesome.
because that's what you really need to know is on the bigger budgets, what we'll do is we'll go and talk to consumers who are in the target market. And what we're trying to do there is learn a couple of things. We're trying to learn what is their frustration, what role does this product play in the higher order of their life. Why is this purchase so important to them? And then try to work out what's the frustration. So when we were doing it for PlayStation, what we realized was one of the biggest problems that they were facing was actually a bigger cultural problem. So we interviewed gamers, and what we heard was when they had this mastery or skill in the game, so say they won FIFA 21, they thought, or culture told them, that that's not a real skill or that's not a real achievement. They were feeling all these emotions, this elation, this adrenaline rush of like, yes, I just won. But they were told, dampen that down. That's not real. But if you win your, indoor soccer league with your co-workers, that's like fine to celebrate that. And you're like, yes, that's real greatness. We really achieved something. And so for us, the insight came out of those conversations, the frustration that gamers were having, because we wanted to align with them. So the whole campaign was to invite, inspire, and challenge gamers to their greatness. Because we wanted to say, as PlayStation, another cultural brand, we're like, no, you know what? The feelings that you have, they are legitimate. They are real feelings. And that's how we're going to do it. So that all came from interviews with gamers. Now, that obviously costs a lot of qualitative research. That's going to cost a lot of money. You're not going to be able to do that on every budget. So there's a lot of research that you can read, you know, as we were going down. When I was doing the Roomba reviews, that was just me and another junior strategist. I was freelancing and we had 24 hours to pull that. So you can do things of reading Amazon reviews. I think and I've got ways that I've done it with also, which I can talk about in a minute, with like ChatGPT. But I think what the most important part of it is to really understand what you're looking for, because it can come from anywhere. You just need to know that you're looking for a revelation. You're looking for something, someone saying that's contrarian, or it's a paradox. It's like, oh, that shouldn't make sense. Because what we're trying to do with the reason insights are so important is they're really breaking what most people want to do with advertising. Most people want to go, okay, here's an ad, here's the pattern, I can disregard this. I can blank out. I don't even have to pay attention to this. And so that's what happens with most advertising, is like we try to blank it out because we know, oh, chocolate brand coming on screen, they're going to talk about how good their chocolate is, and it's going to end with some shot of them eating the chocolate bar. So what we want to do is reframe that and say, and capture their attention, go, never thought of it that way, or change the opinion of them. So what we're trying to do is often catch them out. And that's what an insight does. It makes us look at the problem, or it makes us look at a situation in a totally different way. So when you're researching, so it could be reading what consumers said, also reading who are the experts in that field, who knows the most about that audience that could give us an interesting point of view, who are their muses. So, you know, if you're a young female athlete, Serena Williams is probably your muse. So what's she saying that's quite contrarian to everything that we've heard before? And so you're trying to look for those statements, or look for those revelations that are going to, again, reveal something new to the audience. So on the very small, you know, very $0 budget side of things, there is this startup brand called Billy Razors. So they're in America, you know, entering the worst possible category. They're like a Dollar Shave Club.
Yeah, okay.
But they're entering for female razors. And what they realized is, you know, women are paying a pink tax on shavers. But what they really realized, what insight they really got to, and the revelation that happened, and now it's kind of commonplace, so we don't even really blink an eye when we see it. But what they realized was, the insight they came onto was, in TV ads for razors, they love to remove body hair. I mean, you know, they're showing us how to remove body hair, but they're always on hairless legs. So you think about the Venus ads from 2000.
I've literally got the image in my, 100%. Yeah.
And you're shaving legs that have already got, like, are we too afraid to even show hair in commercials? And that was their insight. That was their unlock. It was an unlock about the category, that the category wasn't even allowing women to have a choice around body hair, or even have any confidence about body hair. It was just an evil. So they reframed the problem. They're like, problem, you know, women would think body hair's an unnecessary evil that we need to remove. Where what Billy was saying was, no, it's actually a choice. It's a choice, and we're celebrating that choice. And we're saying, hey, it's all right. We're putting body hair in their ads. So that they would not have had a big budget. They were a scrappy startup. Obviously, they had some funding, but that insight completely blew it up for them, and that got a lot of attention and got some PR. So that's what we're always looking for. It can come from anywhere. It can come from a conversation with your partner. It can come from, you know, someone doing a PhD. It could come from a report. What we're trying to look for is the contrarian point of view. So I said a couple of other areas that you can go to find them. Once you know your topic that you're dealing with, once you know the problem that the consumers are trying to solve and use your product for, a couple of other environments that you can do it is often editorial will have it. So journalists often write in it. So it's not the news stories happening every day, but when you look at the editorial pages, and there's some places that are really good for this, like in America, it was The Atlantic was really good.
Yep.
And what you'll see is in the first sentence is an insight, because they're talking about a topic that's been, really smashed in the news, but they've got to give you a new point of view or a new way of looking at it. And so they'll often deal in insights. Other places are like Reddit shower thoughts. So if you go to the subreddit shower thoughts and search your problem or your brand, they'll often have really interesting points of view in there, because what a shower thought is, hey, I'm thinking something. Why doesn't the rest of the world think this? Let me put it out online. And it feels unspoken. And that's, again, what an insight is. It's an unspoken truth. And that's why it always kind of like resonates. So if you see any that get really popular on Reddit, what we're seeing there is an unspoken truth being spoken for the first time, and people having that reaction like, oh my God, yeah, I totally agree. That's the way I see it as well. So that's another area you might be able to find it. It doesn't need to always be expensive research. The thing that I would say is the more important is, once you think you've got that insight, testing that. So going along and saying, hey, I've just had this thought.
And because that was actually my next question, right? As you're talking, and kind of the whole shower thing, you mentioned comedy, right? And it is just the great comedians have this ability to give us a perspective, and it's like, oh, it's so simple, but I've never heard it come from that kind of perspective before. Just that kind of insight into the human condition. But as you were talking, I was thinking, how do you validate? Like, how do you validate that? You might go, yeah, I do think of that, vacuum cleaner acting like a drunk roommate, or if I'm a woman and I can imagine that is how I would feel looking at ads with shavers. How do you kind of validate that insight is you've got the aha, that it's going to actually resonate with a broader audience versus a sample of two kind of thing?
So that all comes down to you being creative. I'm talking about zero. Okay, we'll go the top level and then down. So we'd test that in creative agencies. Yeah, we'd have panels, we'd have focus groups, and we'd run past what we call a couple of territories that they would have insights that were underneath them, and then there's probably a creative idea over the top that we'd run past them. However, you could also just test insights. Now, if you've got $0, what are you going to do? I think you probably look at your customers that you've already got, and is there some way that you can have an interaction or a conversation with them? Are you just going into a shop if you've got some retail footprint and talking to customers there and looking and gauging the reaction, the face? Are we seeing that surprising, response from them? That is what you're looking for when you're talking to other people within the organization. So often when I was in creative agencies, I would, go around to the creative director, go around to the strategist, account director on the team and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Do I see any reaction from them? Because they probably know, especially if they've been working on the brand for a while, know the brand pretty well. And probably you kind of almost fit into the customer after a while because you've researched the category so much. But I'd be going out and talking and looking for those responses. Now you can do that. And then you could do that in a qual survey and, how surprising was this response? There's probably a couple of key words that you're looking for. Surprising. Yep. Did that unlock something for you? There's certain ways, but you wouldn't, you're not trying to lead the horse to water here, but there's certain surveys that we set up that would be like that. There's also visual surveys where you can kind of show 5 different responses. Hey, what was your facial, like, were you smiling, shocked, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the shocked. They're usually the first. And then if you don't have any money, maybe you're sending it out as an email headline. Yeah. And, you're A/B testing that against 2. I'm getting real scrappy down here. But they're things we could do. We could look at it, click on it, and even in the scrappier versions of like watching, maybe we send out something very small and we watch the video playthrough rate of it. I don't want to get too far down there because that's getting creative execution. I think that's a good, I think that's a good kind of summary of from big to small, right? As you're talking,
We obviously do so much work in the digital space. Digital does allow you to test things in a reasonably small kind of test market, which I think is good. In terms of, you left agency land to set up the finishing school, strategy finishing school. I'd love to just for you to talk about it. Like, what is the structure of it? How does it work? What are the modules? What are we coming out at the other end with?
Yeah. So the reason that I started the strategy finishing school, it kind of mirrored my journey a little bit, where I was always a self-taught strategist. So I'd come up through agencies who had just kind of thrown me into the role, and I'd never had that traditional training in strategy or learnt the strategy fundamentals. And there came a point in my career when I moved to New York and moved to BBH at the start, and I realized that my career was halting because of my own imposter syndrome. I felt like a fraud. Felt like I was on a visa too. So I was like, if I lose this job, I get kicked out of the country. So I was running on kind of this kind of scared emotion, and I doubted myself and didn't want to show my strategy to anyone and didn't want to admit that I was self-taught. And what I realized was I was holding myself back. I went to my boss and said, hey, I've actually never had the proper training. After that moment, I got a fundamental training in strategy. I got taught by some of the best strategists in the world, and strategy training is very rare, especially in agencies. And at that point, that was when my career really kind of took off. It was like when I was able to get promoted to head of comms planning at both those agencies and then go on and freelance. And I couldn't do that without that confidence from knowing the fundamentals and knowing I had certain frameworks that I could lean back on. And so when I went out and was working within all these companies and talking to other creative strategists, what I realized was I was not alone. Like, that journey of being the self-taught strategist of, hey, you're the smart person in the room, you're going to be our strategist. I wasn't alone on that journey. I wasn't the only one. And I could see how many people were being held back because they never got the fundamentals, because that type of training is only in like 4 to 5 companies in the world, in agencies and probably in client side as well.
So there's no, like, people do business degrees, marketing degrees, comms degrees. There's nothing at that level, right? In terms of this type of work. So literally you're getting it in big agency land or potentially super big corporate land, right? Who would have just ginormous in-house teams. Is that right?
Yeah. And the time for a boss to explain the process to you as well. You usually learn, I always say that strategy is more like an apprenticeship than a white collar job, because you're often sitting under someone and learning from them. And unfortunately, as margins have got squeezed in agencies, having that, you're often put on accounts and to fend for yourself, and you've stopped that learning straight away. And when you think about remote work now too, there's no way of learning, because one of the things when I was running teams in America, we'd sit all the strategists together, which sounds, of course you'd do that. But they used to sit in client teams, because you just need to hear the conversations. You need to walk past a computer screen and go, hey, why are they doing it like that? Can I see that presentation? And that's just not happening anymore. It's gone, because you're working from home 3 days a week. And so what I realized on top of that, but the main thing is the fundamentals, like explaining what we've had a quick chat about today.
Yeah.
Once you have that, and once you understand that, that's really going to help launch your career. So the way the strategy finishing school set up is, the first chapter is all around the strategy fundamentals. So it gives you the confidence to understand how to put a strategy together on one page, not 68 slides, which is what I used to do and what a lot of strategists at the start of their career, they're like, hopefully you'll find the strategy in here somewhere, but I'm not going to say which slide it is. It's the whole thing.
When you say strategy, are we talking, we're not talking business strategy, right? We're at the kind of creative campaign level. That's where we're talking, right? Yeah.
But the fundamentals of strategy stay the same. When we talk about a business strategy, that still has to be on one page, and it still has to deal with what's our goal, what's stopping us from reaching the goal, and what's our solution. What are the tactics we're going to do? That doesn't change no matter what. So the interesting thing is that I thought, I'll only be relevant to creative strategists who are working at ad agencies. But since then, I've had over 4,000 members in the strategy finishing school. And the amazing thing is that they're coming from B2B, pharma, PR, media, all these other in-house agencies. And anyone who has to deal with a creative output or has to make a campaign or any creative or brand strategy, this is really helpful because it's helping you give that language of how to structure everything. And so a lot of it is based around kind of the key frameworks that I believe in. So we talked about strategy on a page, but the other key one I always talk about is the creative brief. And the formula I use for that is the get who to buy brief. And then other ones is like the comms framework, which is all the messages that you have linked up to the problems, linked up to the media that you will communicate that through. And so that's really helpful when you've got multiple messages, or, you know, you've got a consumer journey where you want to tell multiple messages at different times. The comms framework helps for that. And then we've got things like the blueprint and ecosystem. So I take you through the fundamental frameworks that help you go navigate the process so you know exactly what you have to do at every step. And the course is all on demand. So you go through it in your own time, which was massive for me because it was like when I was in Australia trying to get onto webinars that were on like New York time, just couldn't do it. I'm not waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning. And so this, to be able to, you know, again, democratize strategy and make it really easy to understand, I needed a platform where you could get it when you want and how you want. So there's all that. Then on top of that, I've got my Google Drive, which is full of 15 years of the frameworks and templates that I use. And I think that's really important as we go on and strategists have less and less time to work. You need to have those frameworks that save you from the blank piece of paper because it takes you so often. So one of them in there is like the Framework Factory, which is 50 frameworks that are often used. And so that's so helpful because I know when I'm building something, I'm not starting from scratch. I can be like, hey, that's the one that I need and looks like what I'm trying to do. And then I start from there. So there's that as well. And then finally, there's like a private community that we've got where people can ask questions and get feedback on their work. And at the end of the first chapter as well, I get people to send in their strategy portfolio or their operating system if they're building out a strategy department and they need to sell it to the agency.
Yeah.
I tell them, send that in to me, and I actually give personalized feedback on that because I think that's a really important step too. Often in strategy, no one's there critiquing, giving us the real critique of our work. And so I wanted to be able to do that because I've been lucky enough to work at kind of big companies and then big brands to know what they're looking for.
Yeah, it's great. And we connected based on some of the Rocket team doing the course. And I think you're right there, right? Like we're a digital agency that does have a creative team that does a lot of work for our clients, but to help us kind of move into this space and to do the work we do, it's been so helpful. And I was kind of saying to Julian before we started recording, I think the ability to make the complex simple is a real art, and that's something that we've really enjoyed by doing the course. I'd love for you to talk about how to write a creative brief because I think that is of such practical use for so many listeners to the pod, and your framework is one we've started to adopt within the agency. So yeah, love for you to speak to that for a few minutes.
Yeah. The difference, I'll start with the difference. So I've introduced the framework of the strategy on a page, which was the 1, 2, 3 strategy. So what that document's used for is anyone within the organization, we can send it to them, the finance department, and they can sign off on that marketing budget. We can send it to the creative team. What the Get Who To Buy, the creative brief is for, is this is specifically for the creative team. And so it's the final document that we firstly brief the team on, and then we also review the work against. And so the Get Who To Buy brief is really simple. It's kind of like a prompt type of brief, and it's got 4 pieces. And I think this is the essentials of every brief. You don't have to use the Get Who To Buy, but you need to know these are the 4 things you definitely need in a creative brief. So to get, you write the consumer target there. Who are you going after with this ad? Then the who statement is the consumer problem. And so this to me is the most important part. What is the big problem that they're dealing with? The to statement is the consumer goal. Where are they trying to get to? And then the by statement is the single-minded proposition. What's the one thing that we want to tell people? So that is how we set up the brief. Every brief that we write, and this was something I learned at BBDO, is written through the get, who, to, buy. The thing is, creatives love it because it's so simple. It gets straight to the point. And it's the fun document. Like a briefing obviously includes a lot more information and a lot more flair, and there'll be a budget, deliverables and timings on the end of it. But this is the information. And the reason it is so important, and the way you have to write it is, it's all of those things are from the consumer's perspective. So a creative brief, and this is always my litmus test on a creative brief, is it's never having the words we need to create awareness of this, or we need to, advertise this feature, because that's all your problems from the business. It's all written from the consumers. So again, let's go through an example, because I feel like that always helps. So I was lucky enough to work at BBDO, who had the Snickers account, and you're not you when you're hungry, which is, such iconic work. It's easy to do a big iconic brand, but it's something we probably all know about. So the background to that was Snickers was getting absolutely smashed in the chocolate bar category, because everything up to that date was all about the taste of chocolate. And unfortunately, Snickers doesn't taste that good. Their chocolate is not, premium Belgium style chocolate.
I don't mind a humble Snickers.
A humble Snickers is good.
Probably one of my go-tos.
and maybe the reason it's one of your go-tos as well is because it is the bar that's the most filling and satisfying, because it's filled with nuts. And so because it's filled with nuts, it's keeping you full for longer, and your hunger is satisfied. So their overall, I think, positioning was around satisfied or most satisfied. I've had a bit of a brain melt right now.
Yeah.
But I think it's most satisfying, or something around satisfying.
Yeah.
So that was the original one. When they originally launched, their original target was actually young men, young boys, don't like to cook, are expending a lot of energy playing sports and all the rest. So they were going after young men. Now we think of the bar and, the advertising is for the general population, but they targeted young men. And what they realized was these guys were going out, spending a lot of energy, and going from lots of energy to complete exhaustion, hanging out with friends all day. And what they realized, and this took a bit of understanding, was when guys were feeling hungry, they started being hangry and started acting out. So they would be acting out in front of their mates. And at that moment, friendship, when you're 16, friendship is all you care about. And they were acting out because they were hangry and they didn't know this. What the campaign really focused on, it's not you're just hungry. What they realized was, okay, we need to focus on this part being the most satisfying for that moment. And so the problem was guys were acting out when they were around their friends. And then the two line is that they wanted to kind of see Snickers was the most satisfying bar and be a part of the pack, not kind of thing, not stand out. And so the byline was showing that Snickers was the most satisfying bar, and it was you being hangry that was keeping you out of the mix. So the consumer problem there was the real thing that kind of was the focus of that campaign. Was they were really focusing on the problem of you're not yourself when you're hungry. So that was the get who to buy for that. I'll give you another example, because it's always good to have a couple of examples for this, was Cheetos popcorn. They had this great campaign about 4 years ago, where they, again, I feel like unlocked a really good consumer problem, where what they did is it was an ad with MC Hammer's "You Can't Touch This." And it was a guy holding his hands up, and he'd eaten Cheetos and he was being asked by everyone in his life to help with something, right? There's like, can you help fit? It was like the first scene was help this boss. The boss comes up to him, "Oh, can you do this paperwork for us?" And he's like, just holds his hands up with the Cheetos dust. "Yeah, I can't do this." Then his friends at the gym wanting him to spot him, and then his hands are up, and then there's people moving his apartments. He just throws his hands up with the Cheetos dust. And what they realized was, again, probably similar audience, young audience, the consumer problem there was the world had kind of got to this hustle culture of like, if you think of the Gary V's of the world, of just like hustle, like optimize every minute. They started, and now it's kind of quite popular, this either, the quiet quitting or not working so hard, not burning yourself out. But for the time, it was quite revelatory. So an insight. So they realized that the consumer problem was like in a kind of hustle culture world, they were feeling quite isolated, these guys. And so what we wanted to do was say, hey, take the time, take a break, and that's what snacks are for. They're to have a break. So snacks, take a break to relax and not feel like you have to do everything today.
Far deeper than the actual context of eating a packet of chips or some popcorn, right? It's kind of got a much deeper kind of
level.
I can't imagine you on Super Bowl Sunday or Super Bowl Monday, as it is here, just watching all the ads. Just you'd be your Christmas day, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it was great when I had a couple of ads in there as well, that's really exciting when you're like at a Super Bowl party and you're like, oh, I worked on that.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
They were the good moments.
That's great. What I'd like to talk about is you kind of touched on it earlier, but generative AI. So you mentioned ChatGPT. I'm not sure if you're playing around with Google Bard or any other platforms, but how that is assisting people like you do the work that you're doing, because I know you've done a lot of work in the space.
Yeah, so I'm very bullish on it, and I think it's going to be helpful. It's a tool, and we've got to use it as a tool. I think it's not replacing us, but being open to new technologies is always the way for me. I've kind of had a lot of backlash because I've been probably one of the most vocal in the strategy space about how to use it and what to use it for.
Yeah.
So the common misconception or the common problem is that when you ask ChatGPT, give me an insight on, Hilton hotels. Actually, this is a good example because I actually did this for it. What it will do is it will give you the amalgamation of the average person trying to write an insight. So it's like, if I ask someone on the street, tell me an insight, it's probably the same. It's like, an insight, maybe that they've got 400 hotels across Hilton, across the world, or, they've got a great green environmental policy. That, as we've talked about at the start, that's not an insight. That's not a revelation. That's like, oh, okay, yep, well, 400 hotels. So what you need to do, and I think this comes back to all strategists, and it's actually a great exercise, is you need to work out what would you need to tell the average day person to make them a great strategist. And so for me, when I did it for Hilton Hotels, what I did is I said, well, I know it's a revelation, so it's the complete opposite of what people think. So I asked, tell me the 10 cliches about hotels. And the first one was like, I think it was like home. It feels like a home away from home. And then I said, tell me the complete opposite of every single statement. And it had heaps of statements, and 9 out of 10 of those statements didn't make sense. But the first one did. It was said, Hotels are nothing like home. And I thought to myself, actually, that's probably a good kind of insight for Hilton, is because while the world is trying to be like Airbnb, or they're the popular thing of making everything homely, actually sometimes home sucks. It's like full of stress. It's full of dishes in the dishwasher, in the cleaning.
Unresolved issues.
So many of them. So it's like, that's something we can use. And the only reason that was because you're pushing it to be the contrarian. You're pushing it to say the complete opposite. And that's when you find something great. And so if you just stop and say, hey, tell me insight, or hey, write a brand strategy for me, or write me some new ads, it's going to give you trash, like absolute rubbish. But if you can think, how can I change the way I use it? It'll really help. The second thing I'd say is I think of ChatGPT like salt in cooking or with a meal. Salt's really good when you're preparing a meal. If you want to salt, over here in Portugal, it's salting cod, keeping it for a very long time. You never use salt in the middle of a dish. You only use salt at the very end to up the taste. And that is the same with ChatGPT. You use it at the start for hypotheses and hunches. Yeah. And then you use it at the end for strengthening up your strategy, writing it more creatively, writing it with less words, making it punch harder. That's when you use it. But you never use it in the middle. When you're trying to validate an idea, that's when you got to go speak to customers or go somewhere else, because it's going to just make up bullshit. It's going to tell you what you want. So use it at the start and the end, but never in the middle.
It's a great metaphor, the salt one. And we come at ChatGPT from a different perspective, just doing a different discipline than what you do, but very, very similar perspective. For us, we have a saying within the agency, which is ChatGPT won't replace you, but someone using it will. Will be very disappointed if it's the only thing you're using, but very disappointed if you're not using it. And for us, it's fast mediocrity to just get stuff from nothing to 50% very, very quickly. And then it is expertise and understanding and the science and the art of whatever discipline that someone in the agency has, spent the last 3, 5, 15 years honing. But then, the finishing touches, work on this and give me 3 different variants or whatever else, and it can be really effective. But I think the salt one, I'm going to start using that one. I'm stealing your,
I think, can we do a trade here? Because I actually really like the, it's not going to replace you, but someone using it will replace it.
I stole that at an SEO conference I went to in Texas in April. But sure, take
it. Yeah, take it. It's a bit of a trading of AI-isms.
It's a good one, mate. It's been awesome talking with you today. I always finish the pod with it's a simple question. It's sometimes hard to answer, but what's the best piece of career advice that you would give to I'm going to say an Australian marketer? I know you're over there in Portugal, but you know our market well. So
I think to me, it comes back to this last point where 2 things. It's being really open to change and being on the boat that is changing first, being one of the first in the boat, because that is going to stand you in good stead. And I think throughout my career, if there's one thing that's really, really helped was I always put myself in a position, like I started my career in social media. I wrote a thesis on social media in 2008 on it was when MySpace and Facebook were changing over. It was that year. And I knew that was going to be a rocket ship to put yourself faster on the fast track. And I think if you're always open to new things, it's the best place to be, rather than fighting it, just trying to have that kind of open mind and see how it can work, stands you in good stead. And then the other thing I would say, if you're open to having your opinions out there and publishing, it's what 99% of the people won't do. They just kind of consume. It's very, very frightening, and I'm sure you can recognize this, very frightening, putting your own voice or opinion out there, because you're like, people are going to say I'm dumb or I'm going to get, shut down on this. But as someone who's probably annoying levels, has constantly put my own thoughts out there, it's done two things. What I've realized, firstly, is no one's gonna like pull you down. And then secondly, it just makes you better at your job. So teaching strategy or having opinion and writing and putting it out there has grown me exponentially as a strategist, and my skill set. So I think it's really helpful to, if you can put yourself out there, do it. LinkedIn, wherever it is, Twitter, give it a shot.
They're awesome. They're two excellent bits of feedback, and I couldn't agree more with both of them. Love both of them. Julian, could talk to you forever about strategy. Thank you so much for your time. So generous, and hope to get you back on the pod at some point in the future.
Excellent. Would love to come back.